In this introductory video, we're going to introduce the somatosensory system by beginning to address what's called sensory coding. And sensory coding refers to the process in which the nervous system transmits stimuli towards the central nervous system and how that information is processed. But to understand sensory coding, we go back in history a little bit to Aristotle, who was a Greek philosopher, and is credited with defining the five senses that we know quite well. Interestingly, Aristotle also defined a sixth sense, which he just generally referred to as intuition. When we think about sensory information, what we're referring to is neural activity that is being transmitted towards the central nervous system. And this neural activity originates from stimulating receptor cells in various parts of the body. In terms of somatic sensation, we're referring to the conscious awareness of such stimuli. One example is proprioception, which is a specialized submodality of touch, and it relates to the position and movement of body parts, or rather the perception of the position and movement of body parts. Other elements of somatic sensation also incorporates the perception of pain, the feeling of itch, and temperature. In terms of visceral sensations refer to sensory signals through the stimulation of sensory receptors embedded within internal organs. And oftentimes, these can rise to conscious awareness or subconscious levels, and visceral sensations function largely to maintain physiological homeostasis. The vestibular sense is a reference to the ability of a person to maintain body stability and balance, usually in an upright standing position, but often being in a seated position. Vestibular sense is also very important to maintain the body within the gravitational field, and largely comes from head movement and head position. The sensory response to stimuli, as a key concept here, relates to specific receptors. Now, these are the neurons, the sensory neurons, that are very specific to a particular tissue in the body that will respond to specific stimuli that will give rise to very specific outcomes. And to describe the sensory pathways, the term recursive sensory pathway is often used and refers to the nervous system modifying and the incoming sensory information. So the key concept in understanding how the sensory system works is that receptors will function to transduce stimuli into electrical signals, or rather bioelectrical signals. And those stimuli can be electrical in nature, can be mechanical, chemical, or thermal. And when we talk about that electrical, or rather bioelectrical transduction, we're referring to action potentials, which is the mechanism in which the nervous system uses for communication. On this slide, we just see a couple of examples here. This is not a full exhaustive list of the sensory systems, but when we think about touch, we're referring to external contact on the body that will transmit any sort of external contact to the central nervous system. And that external contact could also take the form of pain, which is transmitted through a different pathway than non-pain touch receptors. In terms of balance, structures located within the inner ear give rise to our ability to maintain that body position within the gravitational field. And as mentioned earlier, proprioception, a submodality of the sense of touch, gives rise to our conscious awareness of body and position in space. and comes from a number of different sensory receptors. One such receptor is called the muscle spindle, which is buried inside muscle tissue, giving a sense of the length and the rate of length change that takes place in muscle. So this ends our first introductory video to the somatosensory system.